to meet you. I'm Trina. I wanted to share today a little summary of every book that I read in September, because I read some incredible new books. There were some faves. It was a slightly distracted reading month for me, I'm not gonna lie, but I still managed to get through 10 books, which is way over my reading goal for like my monthly reading goal. But I think in comparison, I read like 20 books in August. I was really cruising in August. In comparison, 10 books feels like not that much, but it was a really good reading month, despite my distractions. I read mostly at the beginning and mostly at the end. Overall, I had a book that might be a new favorite, I had a really good series, and I had a classic that I've been meaning to read for years. And I think I ended the month on a 4-book 5-star streak, which is unheard of for me, so really happy to share these books with you today. I actually started this month on the beach. I think day one I was at Virginia Beach on a holiday. So since I was on the beach, I had to read a beachy vibes romance book that I've had on my shelf for ages that I've been meaning to read, and that was Howl's Moving Castle. But I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this book. I love the movie as well, of course, but I didn't necessarily grow up watching the movie. I only watched it recently. So I think that for me, I didn't have like too strong of nostalgia goggles on while reading this book, and I was just able to enjoy it for what it is, which is a really great little romance fantasy. This book is about Sophie, who is the eldest of 3 daughters and a hat maker, who is cursed one day when the Witch of the Waste, who is the villain of the book, comes by her hat shop asking for a hat just like the one she gave another woman. And Sophie can't give it to her, then the Witch of the Waste curses her to become an old woman. And Sophie flees away from her home and runs into the moving castle that you can see on the castle that walks around of the wizard Howl, who's known to steal women's hearts. The book is pretty, if you know, I've watched the movie, and I know a lot of people know the plot from the movie. The book is slightly different on a few points. It's much less about war, because the movie is obviously a Ghibli movie. So Miyazaki wanted to emphasize war more and talk about that. The villain of the book is the Witch of the Waste, and defeating her is the goal of the book. And also in this book, Sophie's sisters are way more prominent characters, and we get way more insight into Howl's personality and more explanation for his actions in the book. And also Wales is involved, the actual real life country of Wales, which I was not expecting at all. So the book is just different enough from the movie that I actually didn't really know how we were going to get where we were going in this story. So I was really pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this, and it's a great little beachy read. And I gave it 5 stars, because I guess I was expecting to like it, but I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did. That is Howl's Moving Castle. And then after that book, I was sick for a week from the plane ride, so my brain was simply unable to consume any literature whatsoever, except for Kindle Unlimited romance books. But I'm not ashamed of it, because I needed to read something, I needed to keep my eyes moving, but I was way too sick to read anything else. The first one I read was Fake Out by Finley, which is a fake dating romance. The plot of the book is this guy has told his entire hometown that he is gay. He does not think he is gay, but he just needed an excuse to break up with his girlfriend. So he's coming back for that girlfriend's wedding, and he has to bring a date. So he brings his best friend's brother with him as a date. Obviously, he realizes he's bisexual, and he falls in love with this guy. I actually thought this was pretty good. It's kind of boring. It's kind of predictable, kind of straightforward. After the wedding is over, there's not really much going on in this book. And then at the end, things started getting really absurd. Oh, now I'm remembering. Someone ends up in a hospital, and then professional hockey players show up. It kind of gets absurd at the end. But otherwise, I thought it was kind of a cute book, a cute way to spend the time, and it's a happy little ending, so not complaining. And then my second literally fever-induced Kindle Unlimited read was God of Fury by Rina. This is a dark romance book. It's the 5th book in a series in which I've read none of the other books. It's a dark romance between Nico, who's a Russian mafia kid son, and Bran, who's one of the guys in the rival mafia. This is a very confusing book, especially if I haven't, because it's obviously the 5th book in a series, so I should have expected that. I'm not going to probably be reading any of the other books in the series. I looked through their general plots, and it seems like they're even more unhinged than this book, so I think I'm just going to leave it there. I got out of my fever fast enough that I didn't have to read the rest of the books in the series. It was a good way to pass the time. There's so much plot happening in this, so I could really just I was just dragged along by the plot of all the crazy things that happened. And I actually really liked the main character, Bran. Nico, not so much, but I really liked Bran because he's dealing with some serious issues in this book that I feel like weren't particularly well addressed, but were very relatable, and he's a character with some serious anxiety. So I actually really liked him, but the rest of the book was something else. So, moving on. Then when I got my brain back, in probably the highlight of the month, I finally read the first 3 books in the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, which were so incredible. I was not expecting how much I would absolutely fall into this story. They were very, very harrowing, too. It was very intense. I was a very stressed reader, which is probably why I have so many romance books this month, because I had to break up this series because I was getting too invested. This is a sci-fi series set, I think it's some 1,000 years in the future, maybe, or maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's an alternative version of the present. I'm not really sure, but essentially a version of the world in which humans have colonized the rest of our solar system. And because of some wars that happened some 800 years back in the book, they've created a color-based hierarchy system to govern the world, where golds are at the top and reds are at the very bottom. And the book starts with our main character, Darrow, who is a red. He has never seen the sky. He basically drills under the surface of Mars, and just like his family has for all time, and just like he intends to do for the rest of his life. But then he loses someone he loves that's very close to him, and he basically gives up on living, lets himself be arrested and hung by the government. But he's rescued from being hung, and is turned into a gold, basically, in the beginning of the first book. And from there, his purpose is to infiltrate the golds in order to take down the system within. And the first book is very dystopian. I was surprised it was compared to the Hunger Games beforehand, but after reading it, I totally get the comparison. But then it slowly morphs into space opera. Overall, I loved all 3 books. I loved the second and third book best. It feels like the world building in this series is the first book, you're okay, this is kind of interesting, not something not crazy, not super special. And then in book 2, Golden Sun, and book 3, Morning Star, the world building just keeps going, and you just keep getting more and more details about the different colors and the color hierarchy, and get way more information about them. And the writing also gets better and better. You really feel the first book is kind of Pierce Brown is finding his footing with this very direct action-based writing style. But by book 2 and 3, you really don't notice the writing issues anymore. It's just a really good ride. Or maybe I just ignored it because I was so invested in the plot by that point. But I really, really loved book 2 and 3, and I'm so excited to read the rest of the series, but I definitely need to take a break. And I also want to make it last as long as possible, so I'm going to take a little break before reading the rest of the series. But if you're looking for an action series that still says something about society and has meaning and has really cool characters and characters you get really attached to, I was not expecting how much I would get obsessed with Darrow, then I highly recommend Red Rising and the full series. But I can't speak for the last 3 books, but I can definitely recommend this first 3 books, and they kind of stand alone as a trilogy as well. So if you just want to start out with the first 3 books, I think that's a good place to start. And then in the middle of reading Red Rising, I threw in a couple of other books to break up the craziness that was that trilogy. I listened to an audiobook of a nonfiction called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Oddell. This book was not really what I was expecting. I was kind of expecting, something kind of self-helpy, which is why I listened to it on audiobook, because I wasn't expecting it to be that intriguing. But it actually ended up being very academic, and went into a lot of really interesting details about protest and protest movements to resist capitalism, drawing on your attention, all that stuff. And I thought Oddell did a really good job at covering a huge range of topics. It was a little bit chaotic as a book. It kind of, especially on audiobook, I lost track of where we were and where we were going and what the point was a couple of times. It kind of just felt like Jenny Oddell had a lot to say and she just wanted to say it all. But I can appreciate that style of writing. So that's why I bumped it up to a 4-star, because I felt like it was also very relevant to my thoughts at the time. I've like spent a lot of time outside in nature this summer, and I'm just thinking about like how like rejoining yourself with nature can be so good for the soul and stuff like that. So I felt like it was really content that I related to and that I enjoyed, which made it a good read. But it was a little bit chaotic, and I definitely would not recommend the audiobook. It sometimes felt like it was being narrated by like an AI voice. The audiobook narrator had very little emotion. If you want like a good academic piece about what the attention economy is and like bioregionalism and stuff, I recommend. The other book I read in the midst of all the sci-fi was a little historical romance called We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian, that I kind of read mostly on my phone while I was on like my way to and from work. And I wanted to really sit down with Red Rising at the time. I didn't want to just read it in between, so this was my book to read in between. It's set in the 1960s in New York, and it's a love story between two journalists. Nick, who is an Italian-American journalist who's really worked his way up the ranks in the publication, and then Andy, who is partnered with him. Kind of Nick partners himself with Andy, but Andy is this owner's son, and he's kind of jumped into the newsroom to like learn the ropes before he's expected to take over the company. And I loved these characters so much. Andy is an incredibly like chaotic person, and I feel like he definitely has potentially ADHD or like, but it's set in the 1960s, and Cat Sebastian does a really good job with the historical setting. So he is never like explicitly said, but he's clearly neurodivergent and like struggles with a lot of other things, but is really good at other things in comparison. I'm explaining this badly, but he's a very relatable character. I loved him a lot, and I just feel like Nick's relationship with him is like it could have been a rivals to lovers story, like where like Andy is the boss's son and Nick resents him, but like Nick wants to resent him for like about 2 pages before being like, this bumbling guy is gonna get himself locked in the elevator every single day if I don't help him out. And so like Nick falls in love with him, and it becomes more of a friends to lovers story where the two of them take care of each other as friends for the first half of the book or so, and then fall in love after that. And I just think it's really well done. It was really beautiful. Cat Sebastian does so good with this historical setting. I was really surprised. They really spoke like it could have been the 1960s. Like they really, and the representations of like queerness and queer life in New York in the 1960s was also really well done. So yeah, I loved that a lot, and I highly recommend for a little romance book. And then in the final few days of the month, I knocked some books off of my physical TBR that I'd been working on for a long time, because I finally had time for them. And the first one that I finished was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. When I tell you, there's my tabs. When I tell you I love this book, this might be a new favorite for me. So when I was so surprised by how much I love this book, it really is such incredible like fantasy realism, also kind of dystopian, maybe in a sense, but it's really hard to explain what this book kind of is about, because the plot doesn't really start until the second half, so I don't want to like spoil anything. But essentially, it's about a man who goes by the name of Piranesi, who is wandering the halls of this world composed of ginormous, interconnected, like marble halls in a 3-story, like endless building, basically. And where the bottom floor of the building is the ocean, and the top floor is like the clouds in the sky. And the walls are all covered with these like marble statues. It's a really cool atmospheric setting. I love the way it's described. I love the way that Piranesi, like the way the story is told also through Piranesi's like journal entries. I think the journal style works really well for this book. And Piranesi's voice also works really well. I love his character. He's also a very unreliable narrator. I've heard this book described as no plot, just vibes books, but I really strongly disagree with that. I feel like Piranesi, as an unreliable narrator, just doesn't notice a lot of the plot happening in the first half, but there is there are things happening that the reader is expected to like read between the lines and catch. And I think that subtlety is done really well. And when the plot does come, it's such a cool plot. And I was not expecting that. I thought it was so interesting. And this book definitely like spoke to me. I really, really liked it. I thought it was really well done and really exceeded my expectations. So I highly recommend Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And then the final book I read this month was something that's been on my TBR for probably a decade, and that is The Kite Runner by Khaled Husseini. This book, I remember every single person in my high school English class talking about this book during their English presentations, so I thought I knew what I was getting into. I really didn't. I misremembered a lot of the things that happened, and I was still really surprised and really enjoyed where the story went. But yeah, this is a book that's been on my TBR for 10 years. For literally 10 years. So when I came across it in a little library the other day, I was like, this is fate. I have to finally read this. And I did. This is a book that follows Amir, who is a boy in Afghanistan in the, I want to say 70s, early 70s, late 60s. And Amir essentially grows up as a very like selfish, kind of spoiled boy, where his family, or him and his father belong to a higher social class. And even though he spends all of his days with one of his servants, Hassan, he still sees Hassan as like lesser than him. He doesn't see him as a friend, he sees him as a servant. And when something really horrible happens to Hassan and Amir shuns him for it and is cruel to Hassan, it really is like a moment where Amir thinks he's irredeemable as a person, where he's just like a terrible person. But then the book kind of moves into Amir as an adult, where he's given the opportunity to go back to Afghanistan. They've fled the country at that point. Sorry. Amir and his father flee the country, but Amir is still like filled with guilt about the way he treated Hassan. So as an adult, he's given the opportunity to go back to Afghanistan and seek his redemption as a person. I don't know, I was really not expecting that storyline. I was expecting the entire book to kind of be set in this like early 70s of his childhood, but it's not. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's a really great like character-focused, character-centered story about Amir and about him growing as a person that I really enjoyed. And I thought the setting worked really well. Husseini does a really good job of talking about like war and loss of innocence. And although some of the characters are a little bit like simplified, and I know it's been critiqued for that in the modern day, obviously when this book came out, it was really, really important and really meaningful the way he wrote it. And I think the themes he discusses with like loss of innocence because of war, and the worst and the best of mankind is just really well summed up in this book. And I'm really glad I finally read it, and I'm really excited to read A Thousand Splendid Suns as well, which is also on my physical TBR. So that's everything I read in September. I definitely started on a slower note, but I really picked up there in the end, and I'm really happy about all the books that I did read. Some very anticipated reads in Red Rising and Piranesi that I'm really glad I enjoyed as much as I did, as much as I was expecting to enjoy them. But yeah, let me know what you think about the books that I talked about today. If you liked them, if you didn't. If you've read the rest of Red Rising, please do not spoil anything in the comments, but let me know what you think. I'm really excited to get back to that series. So yeah, thank you so much for making it this far if you did. I appreciate you watching so much, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!